Okay, let's dive right in. We're about to unpack one of the most, frankly, shocking geopolitical events in a long time. The president of Venezuela showing up in the United States. And we're going to unravel this entire mystery through the lens of one analyst, Mookie Tenenbaum.
So get this. Nicolas Maduro, a guy with a multi-million-dollar bounty on his head from the US, is suddenly, somehow, on American soil, inside a New York federal court. This is the bombshell that kicks our whole story off.
And right away, this is the question that's on everyone's mind, right? How on earth did he get there? Was this some kind of covert U.S. raid that snatched him from Caracas? Or was this all a negotiated surrender, a backroom deal that we're only now seeing the results of? The truth, as you can probably guess, is way more complex. To figure out what's really going on, we're going to lean on our guide for this, Mookie Tenenbaum. He argues this whole thing is basically political theater. It's a show. And to get it, he says you can't get distracted by the spectacle of Maduro in a courtroom. You have to look at the other hand, the one making the moves you're not supposed to see.
Now, I'm sure you've seen the headlines. Statements from the UN, calls to action from the European Union. Well, according to Tenenbaum's analysis, you can just ignore all of it. He's really blunt about this. He argues these organizations are basically failed and that their statements and their meetings have exactly zero impact on what's happening. They're just not the real players in this game.
So, if these big global bodies are just background noise, how are we supposed to understand the real power dynamics at play? Well, Tenenbaum's analysis gives us this really powerful historical metaphor that just cuts right through all the confusion. And this, right here, illustrates his point perfectly. In Tenenbaum's view, the United States is acting as the modern Roman Empire, and pretty much every other allied or smaller nation, they're basically vassal states or provinces. And in that kind of world order, what the provinces think or say has absolutely no influence on the decisions made back in Rome. Which, of course, brings us right back to our mystery. If the opinions of the EU, the UN, and all these other countries are, well, meaningless in this equation, then Maduro ending up in New York had to be the result of a decision made by the empire alone. So how did they pull it off?
All right, so working within that framework, Tenenbaum's analysis lays out three possible scenarios, three ways this could have gone down. And each one peels back a totally different layer of this geopolitical drama.
Scenario number one is the most straightforward, the official story, a capture. But Tenenbaum points out a really crucial detail here. It would have been an operation led by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, not the U.S. military. And that's a huge distinction, because it frames this as a law enforcement action against a drug trafficker, not an act of war.
Okay, the second possibility is way more interesting, a secret deal. Tenenbaum suggests that either Maduro himself or maybe his very powerful deputy, Delcy Rodriguez, negotiated his surrender in exchange for, well, who knows what. This scenario would explain why so many world leaders are supposedly so nervous. If Maduro starts talking, he could expose decades of dirty deals all over the world.
And then there's theory number three, the grand chessboard move, a superpower trade. The basic idea is that Trump and Putin cut a deal, something like Russia gets a free hand in Ukraine, and in return, the U.S. gets a free hand in its backyard, Venezuela. It's a big theory, but Tenenbaum himself actually thinks this is the least likely of the three.
But here's the thing. According to Tenenbaum, it doesn't really matter which of those scenarios is the true one. Because the real target of this whole operation wasn't just Nicolas Maduro. The real point of all this was to send a message to the rest of the world. And this gets us to the absolute core of Tenenbaum's analysis. He calls it an elbow nudge. Look, everybody already knows the U.S. has massive economic and military power. That's not news. The piece that's been missing, he argues, is the will to actually use it. This event was a demonstration, a very public one, that the intention to use that force is back.
So who is this message for? Well, Tenenbaum identifies a very specific list of recipients. You've got Iran and China, who both have interests in Venezuela. You have neighbors like Mexico and Colombia. And you even have allies like the European Union and Arab nations. The point was for everyone to watch this and understand that the rules of the game have just changed.
So that's the global picture. But what about on the ground, inside Venezuela? With Maduro gone, does this mean it's a new day for democracy? Well, according to Tenenbaum's analysis, the reality is way more complicated. You shouldn't be expecting a total political reset.
Tenenbaum actually breaks down who he thinks holds the real power now. He says the U.S. needs someone to keep the country from falling into total chaos. That person is likely Delcy Rodriguez because she controls the Secret Service. But the real power behind the scenes, he says, is her brother. Meanwhile, opposition figures like Maria Corina Machado are seen as totally incapable of running a collapsed state. So the bottom line? The Chavista elite, that whole structure, will probably stay in place just to maintain some kind of order.
So the crucial point to take away from all this is that the sight of Maduro in court is not the climax, not even close. According to Muki Tenenbaum, everything we've seen so far, the capture, the global messages, the power shifts, that's all just the prelude. It's the setup for the main event.
And that brings us to the final and maybe the most powerful takeaway from Tenenbaum's entire analysis. After all the drama we've just witnessed, he is absolutely certain of one thing. The most interesting part is yet to come.
Which leaves all of us with this one final question to think about. Are we watching the end of the Maduro saga? Or, as Tenenbaum's analysis strongly suggests, have we just seen the curtain go up on a much bigger, much more complicated global drama that is only just getting started?